In today's video, I'm going to do a detailed brush demonstration for the Messy Gouache Brush set for Procreate. Today's video is part 3 of this series. This video is for anyone who is interested in learning more about the brushes and how to use them. Hello and welcome to Color with Kendi. Today's video, as I mentioned, is part 3. I suggest that you watch part 1 and 2 first because they are the foundation. And in today's video, we're discussing the second half of the brush set. Now in part 1, which I suggest you watch first, I think that's the most important video in the series, we talked about the files that you get with the brush set. We did a brief walkthrough of how the brush set is organized. We also talked about brush preset sizes, pressure sensitivity, how to use dual color brushes, how to layer pigment to achieve a more textured look, and we also talked about smudging, clipping masks, as well as how to use a paper texture. That was all discussed in part 1, and in part 2 we discussed a bunch of different brushes. So today in part 3 we're going to talk about all of the brushes that we could not cover in part 2. Now because this is a longer series, I have chapters and timestamps in the description. If you already have the brush set, please open up the brush tutorial canvas so you can follow along with me. And if you don't have the set yet and you are interested in learning more, find the link in the pinned comment and the description. Let's begin. So I've opened up the brush tutorial. This is what we finished in part 2 of the series. We're just going to continue from this point. So let's open up the layers panel, close the grainy hazy group, turn it off. And now we are going to talk about the flat paint brushes. So let's open up that group and tap on 34, 35, 36, 37, and tap on the checkbox so we turn on that layer. So now let's go to brush 34. So brush 34 is one of the first flat paint brushes. We have lots of different flat paint brushes. They all have different textures. The ends are meant to be flat. There are no tapered ends like you see in some of the other brushes in the set. So let's start off with dual color wet flat brush. So select any 2 colors of your choice. Dark green and a really pale green as my 2 colors. There we go. You can pick any 2 colors you like. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in. I am at size 15. So when I use this brush at light pressure at a diagonal, that's what it looks like. If I use heavy pressure, that's what it will look like. But this brush, in my opinion, really shines when you are not using it at a diagonal, if you're using it like this, horizontally. So it's a very different texture. So this is different from this. So depending on the angle of your brush, you will get slightly different results. And this brush is really nice for filling in backgrounds, and you can layer it on. As you can see, it's slightly wet. It's not very dry. And as you layer it on, lift your pencil and you can get interesting textures like that. Now, I want to change my paper texture just a little bit so you can see what's going on a little bit better. Because I feel like the paper texture is a little bit strong for this particular brush. So I'm just going to go to the paint or paper overlay, open up that group. And if you remember from part 1, we talked about how you can change the layers in this paper texture. So I'm just going to tap on CB, tap on paper, and just reduce the opacity just a notch. It's about 36, 35. I'll close that up. So now you can see what's going on a little bit better. Sometimes, depending on the brush, the paper texture can be adjusted to make it look better. So that is brush 34. And if you use 2 really different colors, you will get a slightly different result. But the color mixing in this one is a little bit more natural, and you won't see huge variations in the color. There's really nice color mixing that happens here in this brush. So if I were to use the same brush and let's say use slightly different color, like blue and green, don't know how that's going to look together. Do you see? The color mixing in this one just feels really, really nice and subtle. It's not overpowering. And so it just looks good together. You get a subtle second color. You don't see a lot of that second color, just a little bit. So that is brush 34. Now let's go on to brush 35. So brush 35, as you can see from the image itself, it is a little bit more dry. There's a little bit more texture to it. And let's test this out. Brush size 15. So if I use it at a diagonal, that's what it looks like. Heavy pressure, I will see more of the second color. And if I use it horizontally, That's what it looks like. So not as much difference between the diagonal and the horizontal. And this brush is nice for adding texture, creating backgrounds with texture. When you lift your pencil and add more pigment, you will get this sort of a look. It is slightly thick, not very thick. Now, if you use this brush at a really small size, size 1, I don't recommend it. It doesn't do much. This brush, as you see, nothing is happening. You can hardly see the brush. Do you see? It will create some marks with some texture, but it is not functioning as it should be. It really works well between the preset size 15 and size 35. You can go larger, yes, but when I go smaller, I don't get the best results. This size is still okay. This is size 6, but don't go too small with this. This definitely is not great for defined edges. If you want messy edges, this is great for that. But for defined edges, for smaller shapes, I don't recommend it. But it is really lovely for big areas, and lift your pencil and add more pigment. It is slightly thicker than brush 34 and slightly different texture. Now let's go to brush 36. So brush 36, similar concept to the previous brush. So light pressure, heavy pressure. This is definitely more dry. This reminds me of some of the brushes that we talked about earlier, but the difference is this brush has flat edges. It's meant to be a flat brush. So if you remember, we talked about some of the thick brushes in this set. It is similar to those. That's why this is thick, flat brush B. So it is similar to these thick brushes, but do you see that the shape of these all in their images have a slight taper? So it's a slightly different shape, and depending on your illustration, you may pick one over the other. But if you want a flat shape, brush number 36 is great, and you get nice overlap. So lay down some pigment. I'm not lifting my pencil yet, and I'm varying my pressure. Do you see I say a little bit of the green, a little bit of the blue? Now I'm lifting the pencil and lay down more. Do you see you get that nice texture on top, which if you don't like, you can always smudge it out, but I like this texture. I think that's the beauty of this brush set, is that texture you get when you lift your pencil and lay down more pigment. Okay, let's move on to brush 37. So brush 37 is now similar to the dry brushes. As you can see, the texture is similar, but the edges are a flat brush edge versus, if you go back, these did not have that flat edge. They have a more tapered edge. Not edge, sorry, I mean the ends. The ends are more tapered for these brushes, other than brush 27. The dry flat brush is a flat brush shape. So let's change the color just to change things up a little bit. Let's go to red, pale red, and then a darker red. Okay, I'll pick them. Okay, so light pressure, as you can see, it is very similar to the dry brushes we talked about, but the ends are like a flat brush. Heavy pressure. With heavy pressure, I am still seeing the tooth of the paper come through, but not as much. And if I vary the pressure, that's what I get. And if you lift your pencil and add more pigment, that's what it looks like. So it's a great brush for adding a little bit of texture on top of an existing shape, or filling in a shape with texture. You can use this brush. You can also use some of the other dry brushes. But this one, if you are looking for something that looks like a flat brush, I would pick this one. Okay, so now let's move on to the other flat brushes, and they are all similar concept, so we're going to move through them a little bit more quickly. So let's tap on the layers panel, turn this layer off, tap on 38, 39, 40, and turn the layer on. So brush 38, similar concept, we use the same colors. So let's go to size 15, light pressure, heavy pressure. And with this one, the light and the heavy pressure, the amount of texture you see is pretty much the same. It's not that different. You just see a slightly different color with the heavy pressure. You'll see more of the second color. If I lay down my pigment without lifting the pencil, that's what it looks like. I can lift the pencil and lay down more pigment to get that kind of look. So that's number 38, great for backgrounds and great for filling in shapes too, but not too small. Now, if I go in with size 5. That's what it looks like. I would not go in too small. It's fine, you can fill in really small shapes, but the grain is quite big, so I find that this brush looks better at slightly larger size. Now let's go on to brush 39. So I'm going to use this at size 15. So light pressure, heavy pressure, not too much of a difference with the texture. You see more of the second color, which was the darker red. And if I lay down the pigment while varying the pressure and lifting the pencil, you can create this kind of look. It's a little bit softer than this one. You see this one, you see more of the tooth of the paper. This one you do not. So they have different textures. They used the brush that speaks the most to you, and every illustration will be slightly different. You may pick one over the other depending on your illustration. These brushes I find are really great in landscape paintings because sometimes I like to use a flat brush for that. Okay, so brush number 40, similar concept. I am using size 15. Light pressure, heavy pressure. Again, you're not seeing that much of a difference in the texture. And I'm going to lift my pencil and lay down my pigment in several motions, and you get this kind of look. This one I really like because when you lay down more pigment, it kind of smudges the previous pigment a little bit. So you get that texture within your shape. This is really good for backgrounds in landscape paintings, and it's wonderful for foliage as well if you used curved motions, because you're creating some inherent texture. I mean, this is not the color for foliage, but do you see? You're creating some texture. This is more like a flower here. You're creating some texture around the edges. There's a softness to it, and then you can add your details in with something that's darker. So that is brush number 40. Now let's move on to the next brush. So let's go to the layers panel and turn this one off, and go to 41, 42 and turn it on. Make sure that you've selected the layer. Okay, 41. So 41, I'm going to change the color just to change things up. Let's go with a blue and then a pale blue. Maybe make this a bit darker. Okay. So this one, as you can see, is a little bit more dry. It's a little bit more grungy. So with light pressure, that's what it looks like. Somewhat similar to the stiff brush that we used earlier in the previous video, but slightly different. Heavy pressure. And if you vary the pressure and lift your pencil while you do it, you can create this sort of messy, grungy look. And the larger the brush size, the messier it's going to look. Lift your pencil though as you lay down the pigment. And it kind of looks a little more feathery at a larger size. If you prefer it to look a bit more dry, use it at a smaller size. Now, if you really want that texture to pop, use a darker color. So I'm going to make this a bit darker. And you see, I'm lifting my pencil and then putting it back down and varying my pressure. And do you see how nice and messy this is? So this is somewhat similar to that stiff brush. So let me just show you as a comparison. So we had brush 29, which we discussed in the last video. This one is, as you can see, similar texture, but this one's a bit more stiff. The bristle is a little bit more apparent than this one. This one has a little bit of softness. So this stiff brush has less water in it. This brush number 41 has a bit more water. So that's kind of the difference. So sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Brushes may look a bit similar, but really it is about the water content and then how soft or how hard the brush strokes look. Okay. So now let's go to brush 42. So this is dual color grungy flat brush, similar to 41, but as you can see already, there is less water in this. It's a little bit more dry. It's like a drier version of 41. But then when you apply more pressure, it looks a little bit more wet. So this one can vary a lot depending on the pressure applied. And it's great for filling in shapes as well as backgrounds. So let's say I had a shape, I'll create the shape, I'm varying my pressure. You see, I'm seeing slightly darker areas and a few lighter areas. And then I can go in and fill it. And I'm using really light pressure here. So do you see there's so much texture? So this is much grungier than this brush and this brush. So all the brushes have slight differences, and the trick is to select the one that fits your subject the most. Now let's tap on the layers panel and close that flat paint group, turn it off, and then let's go to background brushes. Turn it on, 43, 44, 45, and make sure the layer is on. So while a lot of the other brushes in this set can be used for backgrounds, these brushes are really meant to quickly color in the background with some texture. And not necessarily with brush strokes, but with a slightly different texture. Let me show you. So I'm going to tap on Dual Color Messy Background A, and I think this brush looks best when you're laying it all over your canvas, so I'm not going to do it in this small section. I'm just going to put that color all over the screen. So I'm going to use the largest size, and the trick with this brush is to use this brush in one motion. So don't lift your pencil too many times, because then it'll become very, very thick and a lot of pigment on your screen. So try to use the brush in one motion without lifting the pencil too many times, and vary the pressure. So I'm going to start off with light pressure here, you see, and then I'm going to make it slightly heavier. It kind of stamps on that texture, and depending on how much pressure you apply, you will get slightly different colors, the colors that you've chosen. And you can quickly add texture to your background. So that's what it looks like. And if you don't like a certain segment, you can always smudge it out. So that's 43, and 44 and 45 work in similar ways. So let me just show you 44. So you can do the same thing. So don't lift your pencil, but just move your pencil across the screen, varying the pressure. So some areas will be lighter, some areas will be darker, depending on the colors you chose. And with this one, I like to leave a little bit of the white of the paper, not too much, just a little bit. Then we have 45, similar concept again. I'm going to use maybe 2 different greens. A pale green. Okay, maybe that's a bit too pale. Let's go with this. So in one motion, without lifting the pencil, I'm applying the pigment. And if I lift my pencil, you can do that too. Vary the pressure. Now let's move on to the detail brushes. So let's turn that off, open up the detail, go to the layer 46, 47, 48, and make sure you've turned it on. So brush 46. So you can do details with any of the other brushes that get small enough, so you don't have to limit yourself to these brushes. But I created these brushes specifically for smaller objects and for details. And they all have a slight tapered end. So if you recall in one of the videos, I think it was part 2, I talked about how to get that tapered end. That tapered end is all about releasing the pressure as you make your stroke. So I will show you that. So brush 46, I'm going to select black for one of my colors, and then maybe a dark blue for the secondary color, and then tap back on black so it's my main color. So at size 25, at light pressure, it looks like that. I'm going to show you at a larger size so you can really see this on the screen. 60, light pressure. Do you see there is quite a bit of texture within the line, but not too much. If you were to zoom out, it's not too much texture. It's enough to make it look a little bit nicer than a regular digital brush, but it's not too much. This is when you don't want too much texture in your details. And if you apply really heavy pressure, you won't see as much texture in the lines. You'll see less texture, and you will also see that color mixing. And I like to vary the pressure to get an interesting look like that. So you have some areas where there's more texture and some areas where you don't have as much. Now, if you want to get that tapered end, start off with light pressure, then move into heavy pressure, and then as you lift off the screen, release the pressure. So that does take a little bit of practice, but you can create that nice tapered end. This is great for details where you want just a little bit of texture so that it looks a bit more traditional, but not too much. Now let's move on to brush 47. So as you can see, it is similar to brush 46, but slightly different texture. in the middle. It's a little bit more wet in comparison. So light pressure, it is wet, but with light pressure, you're seeing less on the screen. You're seeing more of the tooth, but with heavy pressure, you are seeing very little of the tooth of the paper. So this is very pressure sensitive in that way. And in some areas, if you use very light pressure, you will hardly see any pigment. And it's meant to look like that, but sometimes when you use a traditional brush, depending on how much pressure you apply, you may not get that much pigment on the paper. But if you want a steady stream of pigment on the paper, just go to a smaller brush size and then use heavy pressure throughout. But I find that doesn't look as natural to me. I actually prefer to vary the pressure quite a bit, so you have some areas where there is less pigment. But it's a slightly different texture compared to brush 46, but both of them don't have that much texture within the line. Then we have brush number 48, which is a bit more grungy. You're going to have more texture show up. So I'm going to use light pressure. Let's go with a larger size so you can really see this. Light pressure. Do you see there's a lot more texture? Heavy pressure. You still have quite a bit of texture here. And this is the variation. So this one has far more. So if you zoom out, you can tell 48 has more texture than 46, but it is similar to 46. So depending on the illustration, you may want details that have a little bit more texture, use 48. If you don't want as much, use 46 or 47. Okay, so now let's turn that layer off. Go to 4950, turn the layer on, and let's go to brush 49, dual color grungy detail B. So brush 49, light pressure. I'm actually going to do this at size 50 and zoom in a bit. So that's light pressure, heavy pressure. So this is quite bumpy compared to the other ones. The other ones are not bumpy. The edges are not bumpy. This one has a bumpy edge. And depending on how much pressure you apply, some areas will be a little bit dry, some areas will be a little bit more wet. So it will look like that. And it's nice to add a little bit of a grungy line. It is more similar to ink than it is to wash, but I loved it so much so that I had to include it in the set. This is really nice for adding details that have that messy look. And also, if you like the brush, but you think it's a little bit too much for you, if you use it at a smaller size, it feels less grungy. It still does the job, but it feels less grungy. If I go to even a smaller size, size 10, do you see? You still get that grungy look. You still get a little bit of that messiness, but depending on the size of the brush, it's going to look quite different. So you can pick and choose what works for you. Now, brush number 50, there's the dual color dry detail, and this has a nice taper to it. So I'm going to zoom in, light pressure. Actually, this is too small for you guys to see. So this is size 35, so light pressure, heavy pressure. And if I start off with light pressure and then make it heavy and then lift off the screen, you get that nice taper. And this is a great brush to add detail that has some areas where there's more paint and then some areas where it's very dry, like there's hardly any paint left on the brush. So this is a dry detail brush. I really like this one. This is one of my favorite ones, especially because it has such a nice taper. But to get that taper, you definitely have to release the pressure as you move off the screen. So that is brush number 50. So now let's move on. Let's close this. Let's move on to the sketch erase brushes. So let's open up that group and tap on 1, 2, 3, and 4 and turn it on. Okay, so let's go up to brush number 1. 1 and 2 are sketching pencils. You can also use them for details if you'd like. So that's why it's sketching and detail pencil. So I'm just going to tap on brush number 1. And this is not a dual color brush. This is a single color brush. Yes, it's single color. Sometimes I forget. So that is at light pressure and that is heavy pressure. Now it looks less pencil-like at a larger size. If you want it to look more pencil-like, just use it at the smaller size. So it looks like that. And you can use it for sketches. It has a little bit of graininess. You can see a little bit of the tooth of the paper. And you can also use it for details too. And you can also use it for coloring in if you'd like as well. So a bunch of different things you could use this for. So this is the first sketching pencil. Then the second one has a slightly different texture. So this one is light pressure, heavy pressure. And if I vary the pressure, it looks like that. So it's a little bit different, a little less dry looking. So let's see if I make a heart with this one, and you can compare. Slightly different, right? This one has a much harder pencil look. This one has a softer pencil look. And I can reduce the size a little bit too. And if I sketch with it, it has less graininess, less of the grain of the paper showing through compared to the first one. So they're both great for sketching and also for details, slightly different textures. Now let's go to brush number 3. So this is the eraser. So to show you how the eraser works, I should probably lay down some pigment first. So I'm just going to lay down some pigment with brush number 9. You can use any brush that you like. And now what I'm going to do is go to brush number 3, but as you can see, it is for the eraser tool. So don't use this with the brush library, use it with the eraser library. Now, in order to do that, you can either go to the eraser library and pick this brush, or now we've already selected the brush, just tap and hold on the eraser icon. And what you can do now with this brush is just erase. It's a clean eraser, it erases a large area. That's what this brush is for. If you want to erase something with a texture, then brush number 4 is a better option. So I'm going to go back to the brush library. I'm going to lay down some pigment. Let's just choose brush 19. So I'm going to lay down some pigment with this. So now let's say I want to erase this, but I want the eraser to have a little bit of texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to brush number 4, which is the edge eraser, and I'm going to tap and hold on the eraser icon. And now you can erase with that brush. So if I go into the center and start erasing with light pressure, it looks like that. So that's light pressure. Heavy pressure will look like that. It will do a more clean erase, but there is a slight texture to the sides. Now, if I want more texture to the sides, I can go up to size 100 and erase some of the sides. You see? Now the sides of this shape, this pigment, have some texture. If I had erased the sides like this with brush number 3, it would have looked a little bit too unnatural for this particular brush set. Because these brushes are gouache brushes, they have a lot of texture. Erasing with brush number 3 would not work for this particular situation. So that is why I have the edge eraser. So now let's go back to the brush library. And now we have the smudgers. So let's just zoom out. Let's go to the layers panel and close this, turn it off. Go to the smudge category, turn on that group, and tap on 5, 6, 7, 8 and make sure that is on. So we are going to smudge, but in order to smudge, we should probably lay down some pigment first. So let's just go and lay down some pigment with brush 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down some pigment for oops, what did I do? Oops, what did I do? So I'm going to lay down some pigment for each brush. Pick any color you want, and now change up the color. I'm going to go with a blue. Okay, so now we have laid down our pigment. We are ready to smudge. So let's just go to the smudge library and tap on brush number 5. And what you want to do is zoom in. So I'm going to start out with the smaller preset size, which is 10, and slowly smudge this. So I am doing it with very light pressure, and I'm just moving the pigment from one pigmented area to the other. I'm not going into the white of the paper, because then it will look like this, which is not what I want. I just want the black and the blue to mix in. So that's what that would look like. And you can move your pencil in different directions until you get something that you like. You can also go up a little bit in size. But again, try not to bring in the white of the paper. So that's what we discussed in part 1 of the series, how to smudge, so avoid that white. So that's kind of what this smudger looks like. Now, brush number 6, slightly different. So I'm going to show you If I start to move the black into the blue, that's what it looks like. And then if I work the other way, that's what that looks like. So if you completely smudge it, that's what it looks like. So this one I find works better when you're pulling the pigment in one direction. You get the most texture with this brush through that. Now, brush number 7, slightly different texture than brush number 6. I'm going to move the pigment, do you see? Now that's one way to do it, or you could go across and just make it really smooth. So it's a little bit more smooth. So that's another way to smudge. So it's a bit more smooth. So depending on the direction in which you smudge, you will get different results. But avoid going from the white into the color. I don't think it looks that natural. You can work outwards. So I can go from the black outwards like that and smudge it out. That's fine. But bringing too much of the white into the colored area doesn't look as natural. But feel free to choose which way you use it in. And then brush number 8, which is the last brush we're going to discuss, is this one. So this one I find works better when you are moving pigment from one color to the other. So I'm going to use it at size 25. And it's a very soft look. Like that. I'm just moving the black into the blue. A bit softer than this one, than 6. Now if I go in with a larger size, which is size 60 here, you see it's much softer. So this is really great for landscapes. If you are blending 2 colors in the sky, it looks wonderful with this brush. It's softer than brush 6. And in general, I will use brush 5. For most of my smudging needs, I think brush 5 is great. But sometimes when I want the smudging to look a little bit different, I will choose 6, 7, or 8. So those are these smudgers. So I think we have discussed everything. So part 1, we talked about the foundations of this brush set. Part 2, we discussed half of the brushes. And today we discussed the rest. And we are done. And if you have any questions, you can always send me an email at colorwithkendi@gmail.com. And yeah. If you want to learn more about the brush set, you don't have it yet, you just watched this video because you were curious, you can find the link to the brush set in the pinned comment as well as the description. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye!